Hi everyone. Today I just wanted to show how I cut the wedge joint. It's not necessarily a traditional way, and I'm just a random hobby woodworker, so you can just take it as advice from your friend. Anyways, let me show you how I do. First, you have to prep the wood. Well-dimensioned wood usually makes things easier when marking joints. So, while I'm doing it, let me explain a little bit about wedge joint variations. This is a Japanese one from a book I have. The basic idea is the mortise is a wine glass shape and it compresses the tenon in the middle and squishes the wedge in to tighten it up. It made sense to me since they often use soft wood. And here, this is a typical Western style. The mortise is cut with consideration of the wedge size. Anyways, my way will be somewhere in between them. Okay, now marking. Basically, I just mark the mortise and tenon like a normal mortise and tenon joint. So the mortise width should be less than 1/3 of the wood width. Then I add lines on the outer faces of the mortise to make room for the wedges to fit in. Usually, when I use 1/4 of an inch thick wedges on domestic hardwood like walnut, maple, or cherry, it will be about 3/16 of an inch outside of the normal mortise, because the overall tenon and wedges will be compressed to fit anyway. In reality, as long as the wedge has a similar or slightly wider angle than the clearance in the mortise, and is a little shorter than the cutout on the tenon, I don't really use math to figure out all these angles and dimensions, since as I said, wood can compress. Here's the thing, the tapers on the sides don't go all the way to the other face. I usually keep about 1/4 of the mortise straight. You can make it go all the way down, but the tightness at the bottom is important, and this protects the tenon from splitting when you drive the wedges in. So, squaring the bottom part of the mortise is an easy solution. Just so you know, this side of the wood is strong as long as you leave enough material at the end of the mortise. For the tenon, there's nothing special, but the length should be long enough to go through the mortise. So, I usually leave a 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch longer than needed. At this point, I only draw the lines for the tenon width. This width is actually very important. If it's too thick, it will split the mortise, yet you'll see a gap if it's too narrow. My marking lines for the tenon are usually deep, so it's easier to pair to the line when chiseling. If you are not sure how accurately you can cut the width, there's one cheat, though it takes a little more time. Let's say you leave the tenon 1/4 of an inch longer, then mark 1/2 an inch lines from the end of the tenon. You can skip this process, but I will go with this method for the one that you don't want to mess it up. Okay, that's it for marking. Now, let's work on the mortise and start by cutting a straight mortise first. I use a drill to remove most of the material. The key is that the middle part is easy to remove at the end, so focus on the ends. In addition, just in case, I drill from both faces so I don't go outside the lines. Next, removing the waist. You can cut in the waist like making a V shape from both sides and gradually connect the holes. Please stay away from the marking lines for now. Now clear the waist up to the marking lines. There is only one rule. Always cut the fibers first and do the pairing next, especially as you get closer to the final line. Be careful and go little by little to the line. In addition, don't dig too deep when there are a lot of material on the side walls. Your chisel will stuck in the mortise and you can't pull it out. I always go like 3/4 of an inch and remove the side walls. And then I finish the inside face first because wood sometimes has a weird grain, and you may accidentally break the mortise edge without noticing. You don't want that to happen on the outer face. Next, work on the taper. This angle actually doesn't have to be accurate, but grab the chisel and set the angle by confirming the mortise marking line. Then, work it. The important thing is not to grab near the chisel blade. Your chisel will wobble if you hit with force there. You need to hold the handle and then work it. I said the angle doesn't have to be accurate, but the tapered surface has to be flat. Otherwise, it may cause a gap when driving the wedges in. That's it for the mortise. Now onto the tenon and first cut the width. Since this is supposed to be for a beginner, I'll show a cheating way. I marked about half an inch from the tenon end, right? Just cut a little over the small half an inch section of the tenon first. As long as the width of the part is accurate, the tenon will look great even if you have some tear out in the rest of the parts. If the tenon length is only about less than 1 inch, I wouldn't do this process. Instead, just be extra careful when cutting the half an inch end of the tenon. The key is to try not to rely on the chisel too much. Cut the tenon width as close to the marking line as possible with a saw. For example, if you leave 1/8 of an inch outside the marking line, you will need several chisel passes to clear, which may cause tear out especially on the side where you are cutting against the grain. To clean it, you can use a router plane as it's just about half an inch, but I'll use a chisel. Just be careful, the wood has grain. If the grain runs towards shoulder, it's easier to do pairing, but if that's the case, most likely, the grain runs the opposite way on the flip side and it can cause tear out. In that case, you can pair from the side, or you can find the direction in which the chisel runs smoothly. It's only half an inch, so it won't cause a big problem, and even if you break the edge, you'll trim it off, so it won't matter much at the end. After this, you can work on the rest. Just be careful not to damage the part you already cleaned. For those who cut the tenon width all the way to the shoulder at that time, using a skew chisel makes things much easier. Even when working on the difficult side, the blade can run with the grain by pairing from the side. For the other side, you can just use the already cleaned part as a reference to clean it all the way. After that, you need to mark the height of the tenon. This has to match exactly the mortise height on the back face, which is the non-tapered side. If the neck part of the tenon is too loose, driving tight wedges may split the tenon board itself. How you do this is basically the same as slicing the tenon width, but I only trimmed this part to make a small shoulder for stability. In general, I cut off about 1/8 of an inch on both ends. After the saw cut, there won't be much material left over, so it's easy to pare off the waist. The most important things are that the height of the neck part of the tenon is accurate, and that the surface half an inch from the tenon end is clean. And then, just chop the shoulder lines with a wide chisel. I usually cut in only 1/8 of an inch across the board and then go all the way in. Otherwise, sometimes the shoulder becomes like the picture. Next, we'll work on where the wedges go. If you are good at sewing, you can cut it without marking lines, but it's always easier to follow a line, so I use a pencil to mark it. I leave 1/4 of an inch on both sides and cut in at about an 8-degree-ish angle. I also leave the bottom of the tenon uncut about the same length as the straight part of the mortise. After that, you can make a chamfer on one side of each cut so the wedge can go in more easily. Moving on to the wedge fabrication, here's what I do. I'm using a 1/4 of an inch board and first mark the length of the wedge, which is about the same as or a little less than the cutting part of the tenon. Then I just need to make a slope from the marked line towards the end of the board. I've tried many different ways to make a wedge with hand tools, and this is the method that gives me the most consistent results. I also cut the micro bevel on it so it can slide into the gap easily. Then I accidentally cut the wedge to the length at the line, whereas I usually leave about 1/2 an inch extra like in the picture. This one will most likely work fine from my experience, but leaving that extra 1/2 an inch helps ensure the wedge goes all the way in and tighten up the mortise entrance even when the wood compresses more than you expect. Next, cut the wedge to the width of the tenon. Make sure it's exactly the same width or at least a little narrower than the tenon width. Otherwise, it could stress the mortise in the wrong way. Finally, we are all set. Now just glue it. Just in case, before gluing, I do a little gentle kigoroshi process widthwise so the tenon goes through the mortise more smoothly. I also tap around the mortise surface a little bit, and this covers up a little bit of the shoulder imperfection. Please don't beat it up too much to damage it. I used to apply glue with a popsicle stick, but I found using a paintbrush makes things much easier. You don't need a lot of glue as long as the tenon is evenly covered. Then, push it into the mortise. Now, it's time for the wedge. What I found is, at least for me, it's a bit difficult to drive the wedges straight in, so I started clamping sacrificial pieces around the tenon to guide the wedges. This ensures the wedges go in straight, but like I said, this time I stupidly cut the wedges in the minimum size to show how cool I am. I was barely able to hit the last few taps. Be sure to leave some leeway on the wedge length in case the wood can be compressed more than you think. Anyways, after this, I forgot to hit the record button, but basically, the tenon is sticking up about 1/4 of an inch, so I placed 2 pieces of 1/8 of an inch wood, and used them as a guide to trim the tenon with a flush trim saw. And then, chamfer the corners to finish. So, okay, this is the finished joint. To be honest, I'm not usually this much careful to cut the wedge joint. In fact, a piece I quickly cut before this one had a little gap, so I had to recut it by using the cheating trick to make this joint presentable for the video. Well, so when you want to flex your skill, you can always take an extra time to make a cleaner joint. Hopefully, this video gives some idea or hint for improving your joint. And I guess that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I would be happy if you liked the video and happier if you subscribe to this channel. If you have any suggestion to my video, it's also welcome. See you!